Hi, I'm Hailey Stone. Today, when you hear me speak English, smooth, confident, and expressive, you might think I've always been this way. But the truth is, my journey with English has been anything but easy. It's been a long road of fear, frustration, and eventually, breakthrough. I still remember the exact moment I realized English wasn't just a subject in school. It was a wall between me and the rest of the world. I was sitting in my second-year literature class, surrounded by students who seemed to speak English like it was their first language. Some of them had studied abroad, some grew up watching American movies, and others just seemed to have that natural flow in conversation. I, on the other hand, was the quiet girl in the third row, nodding at everything but speaking almost nothing. It wasn't that I didn't know English. I did. I could read thick novels, write essays that got A's, and even score well in grammar tests. But when it came to speaking, when it was my turn to raise my hand or join in a group discussion, I froze. It was like all the words I had in my head suddenly vanished. Every time I tried to form a sentence out loud, I'd overthink. Is this grammatically correct? What if I mispronounce this word? What if they laugh? What if I sound weird? And so I stayed quiet. People assumed I was just shy, or maybe that I didn't have much to say. But inside, I was screaming. I had thoughts, ideas, questions, opinions. I just couldn't get them out the way I wanted. I didn't sound like me in English, and that was the part that hurt most. I would go home feeling exhausted, not physically, but mentally drained. I'd replay moments from the day and imagine what I could have said if I had more courage. Sometimes I'd even talk to myself in the mirror, trying to say things I couldn't say in class. But no matter how many words I wrote or whispered to myself, I still didn't know how to speak them confidently when others were around. My self-esteem started to sink. I began avoiding social situations where I might have to speak English. I even skipped a few workshops just because they were in English. I didn't want to embarrass myself. I didn't want to hear the silence after I spoke. People trying to figure out what I meant or correcting my sentences mid-conversation. And then there was the accent. I had a slight Canadian-French twang, and while some people found it charming, I hated it. It reminded me that I wasn't fluent in the way I wanted to be. I wanted to sound like the people in TED Talks, in Netflix shows, in the interviews I watched online. But I didn't. And so slowly I began to believe that maybe English wasn't for me. Maybe I'd always be someone who could write English, but never speak it. One moment that's forever burned into my memory happened during a class presentation. I had spent 2 weeks preparing my content, memorizing every word, rehearsing every line. I even practiced gestures and pauses. But the moment I stepped in front of the class, my throat tightened. I saw the professor, the classmates, the screen, the blinking cursor on the presentation clicker, and then complete silence. My mouth moved, but my voice felt stuck. When I finally spoke, the words came out rushed and awkward. I skipped slides, mumbled through facts, and ended the presentation a full 3 minutes early. No one said anything bad, but I could feel the difference between me and everyone else. After class, a friend came up and said, "You're really smart, Hailey, but why do you always sound so unsure when you speak?" That hit me hard. It wasn't just about grammar anymore. It wasn't about vocabulary or pronunciation or fancy expressions. It was about something deeper, something emotional. It was about how I saw myself when I spoke English. I didn't see someone fluent. I saw someone pretending, someone afraid, someone holding herself back. I knew I had to change something. Not because I wanted to impress people or sound native, but because I wanted to feel free. I wanted to express myself fully, without translating, in my head or editing every sentence before it left my mouth, but the question was, how? I tried some typical methods. Grammar books, watching English news channels, even writing out full dialogues. But nothing really worked. It still felt like I was studying English, not living it. And I didn't want to study anymore. I wanted to experience the language the way we experience music or emotions. It wasn't until the summer break after my 3rd year that everything started to shift. But I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Because before that summer, there was one evening I'll never forget, a moment that gently pushed me toward something new. I was walking through the park, headphones in, listening to a podcast. I wasn't paying much attention at first, just enjoying the background sound, but then the host started telling a story. It wasn't anything academic, it was just her talking. About a bad date, she went on. She laughed, she stammered, she joked with the listeners, and she didn't use perfect grammar all the time. But I was hooked. For the first time, I heard English not as a foreign language, but as a living, breathing rhythm. It was messy, real, emotional, and totally okay to be imperfect. And for the first time, I thought, maybe I've been trying too hard to be correct, instead of just being myself. That night, I didn't review my grammar notes or highlight vocabulary. Opened Spotify and searched for more of those podcasts. Real people talking about real things. I listened as I walked, cleaned, cooked, even before bed. Slowly, something inside me shifted. I was still quiet on the, When I think back to the summer that changed my life, I always picture the moment I closed my suitcase in a tiny apartment in Toronto and whispered to myself, "It's time." I had no idea then that a trip I planned just for fun would completely transform how I spoke English and how I saw myself. I had just turned 24 and was feeling stuck. Not stuck in life exactly. I had a good job, kind friends, and a small but cozy place to live. But every time someone spoke to me in English casually, especially native speakers, I felt this heavy weight in my chest. I could write in English. I could read in English. But when it came to actually speaking, I either overthought everything or said nothing at all. I wanted to change that. I knew I had to do something that scared me. So, I booked a flight to Barcelona, a city known for its beauty, its energy, and the way it pulls you into conversations whether you're ready or not. At first, I imagined that I'd be surrounded by other travelers, most of them speaking English. I pictured myself sitting at sunny cafes, talking with tourists, smiling, laughing, learning. I thought it would be a fun way to practice, to relax, and to finally get over my fear of speaking. But Barcelona had other plans. From the moment I arrived, I realized most people there weren't speaking English. The street vendors spoke Spanish or Catalan. The locals in coffee shops greeted me with a smile, but kept their conversations short and fast-paced in their own languages. Even when I tried asking for directions or ordering food in English, I was often met with blank stares or polite nods, followed by gestures that said, "No English, sorry." At first, I panicked. I wanted to hide in my Airbnb. I even considered spending the rest of the trip binge-watching English YouTubers instead of exploring the city. But something stopped. Me. Maybe it was the sunshine, or the sound of street musicians near the Gothic Quarter, or the smell of fresh churros from a corner shop. Or maybe it was just the fact that I was thousands of miles from home with no one to fall back on. If I didn't speak, I'd stay silent for the next 3 weeks. So, I stepped out. That night, I walked into a small cafe that looked like something out of a dream. Soft lighting, old wooden tables, Spanish guitar playing softly in the background. I sat near the window, ordered a tea using the 3 Spanish words I knew, and took out my journal to write. That's when I heard someone say, "Hey, is that English?" I looked up. Sitting at the table next to me was a guy in his late 20s, with sun-kissed skin, curly brown hair, and a kind smile. "I haven't heard English in days," he laughed. "I'm Noah from Melbourne." He was traveling solo, just like me. We started talking, slowly at first. I stumbled over words. I forgot the word for recommendation and called it a suggestion, but fancier. I repeated myself. I said and like way too much. At one point, I pointed at a pastry and said, "That sweet circle bread," because I blanked on donut. But Noah didn't laugh. In fact, he seemed completely relaxed. He leaned in, listened, and responded like everything I said made perfect sense. And the more we talked, the easier it became. What was supposed to be a quick chat turned into a full 1-hour conversation. We talked about travel, favorite cities, strange foods, and even our childhood dreams. I found myself laughing, asking questions, sharing opinions, all in English. Not perfect English, but real, human, natural English. That night, walking back to my Airbnb, I felt light. Not because I spoke flawlessly, but because for the first time in my life, I had spoken freely. I had been understood. And I had connected with someone without obsessing over grammar or vocabulary. I had communicated. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the conversation, and I remember smiling in the dark when I realized what had just happened. Confidence, I thought, doesn't come from perfection. It comes from connection. That moment became the turning point in my life, not just for English, but for how I saw communication itself. From that night on, I stopped chasing perfect sentences. I started chasing real conversations, outside, but my ears were waking up. When I got back home from Barcelona, I felt something inside me had changed. It wasn't just that I had finally managed to hold a real English conversation with a stranger. It was that I had tasted what it felt like to express myself without fear. That taste was addicting. I didn't want to go back to the old version of me. The one who used to hesitate, translate every sentence in her head, and overthink every little grammar rule before even opening her mouth. No, I wanted more moments like that cafe conversation. I wanted to speak English freely, easily, naturally, so I made a decision that very night. English wasn't going to be a subject anymore. It was going to be a part of my life. The next morning, I sat down with a cup of tea and opened my phone. First change? I switched the system language to English. It felt weird at first. Some words looked new, some options confused me, but I left it like that. I knew I had to stop running back to comfort if I wanted to move forward. Every notification I received, every setting I navigated, every app I used, it all became a little practice session. And slowly, without noticing, my brain began to think in English. Then I changed my daily routine. You see, before, I used to study English like a school subject. 1 hour here, one workbook there, maybe a YouTube grammar lesson once a week. But now, I wanted real, living English around me. So while cooking breakfast, I played English podcasts. My favorites were travel stories because they combined my passion with learning. I didn't understand every word, of course, but I didn't let that stopped me. I just listened, again and again. Over time, phrases began to stick in my mind like songs. Expressions like off the beaten path or local's favorite started coming to me naturally. In the afternoons, instead of scrolling social media in my native language, I watched English vloggers, solo travelers, lifestyle creators, even daily morning routines. I chose videos without subtitles at first. It was hard, sure. But after a week, I noticed something surprising. Even when I didn't understand 100%, I could still guess the meaning. Tone, body language, repetition. It all helped. I was learning not just English, but how English is spoken. I also wanted to speak more. That's where things got tricky. I didn't have English-speaking friends nearby, and talking to myself in the mirror felt awkward. So I Googled language exchange near me and found a cozy group that met every Friday at a bookstore cafe. The first time I went, I was so nervous I nearly turned around at the door, but I walked in, ordered a latte, and sat at a table with 3 strangers, each just like me, trying to get better. We didn't talk about grammar or tests. We talked about life, jobs, hobbies, dreams. At first I stammered. My sentences were slow and my pronunciation was shaky. But nobody laughed. They nodded, smiled, waited patiently. That kindness gave me something that grammar books never could. Courage. I started looking forward to those Friday meetups. We played games, shared stories, and sometimes just laughed over funny word mistakes. I made friends, real friends, through those conversations. One of them, Jenna, was a nurse from Texas. She once told me, "You don't need perfect grammar. To connect with people, you just need heart." That stuck with me. I think it always will. During the week, I kept practicing, but this time, not with worksheets. I started talking out loud while walking in the park. I would narrate my thoughts in English. "It's such a sunny day. I think I'll go get coffee. Oh, that dog is cute." At first, people looked at me like I was strange, but I didn't care. I was training my tongue and brain to work together. Also started journaling in English. Just a few lines every night, how my day went, what I was grateful for, what I wanted to do tomorrow. Over time, I noticed something beautiful. My writing became more natural. My thoughts flowed more freely, and I didn't reach for the dictionary as much. Words came to me like old friends I hadn't seen in a while, but still remembered. The biggest shift came one weekend when I was babysitting my cousin's kids. They were watching a cartoon in English, and I joined them. I sat there realizing I could understand the whole episode without subtitles, not just the words, but the humor, the emotion, the rhythm of speech. I laughed along with them, not as a learner, but as someone who belonged in the language. This process wasn't quick. There were days I doubted myself, days I felt like I wasn't improving. But then I'd remember the old Hailey, the one who used to freeze when someone asked her name in English. And I'd smile. I had come far. Not by memorizing rules, but by living English. Eventually, I stopped measuring my progress by test scores or vocabulary lists. I measured it by moments, like when I ordered food at a restaurant without pausing, or when I answered a stranger's question on the train, or when I cracked a joke and someone laughed. Not at my English, but because it was genuinely funny. All those tiny victories added up. 3 months after that summer in Barcelona, my world wasn't just changing. It had already changed. The girl who once hesitated to order coffee in English was now leading conversations with confidence. But the transformation hadn't come overnight. It had grown quietly but steadily in the background of my daily life. And it had everything. to do with letting go of fear and learning to just be myself in English. It started with tiny, almost invisible moments. I began talking to myself while making tea in the morning. I'd say, "Okay, what do I need today? Milk? Sugar? Wait, where's the spoon?" I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just speaking. And somehow, those casual private conversations became the safest space for my English to breathe. I also stopped judging myself. You know that voice in your head that says, "Don't say that. What if it's wrong?" Mine used to scream. Now it whispered. And eventually it just faded. Because every time I made a mistake and laughed it off, I proved to myself that the world wouldn't collapse. The grammar police wouldn't barge into my apartment. People wouldn't run away. In fact, they usually smiled, nodded, and kept listening. 1. Afternoon at a language café, I met a woman named Layla from Morocco. We had nothing in common at first, different countries, different cultures, but we shared one goal. We both wanted to become comfortable in English. So we made a deal. No more perfect sentences. Instead, we'd focus on sharing real thoughts, real stories, real feelings. Sometimes we spoke about travel dreams, sometimes heartbreak. Once, we even tried to describe our favorite childhood foods in English, laughing over how many words we didn't know, but somehow those conversations felt more meaningful than any grammar class I'd ever taken, and they were doing something magical to my speaking ability. I realized that fluency didn't mean speaking without pausing. It didn't mean using long words or fancy idioms. It meant speaking like yourself, in another language. It meant being able to say what you truly wanted to say, even if it was simple. And sometimes simplicity was more powerful than perfection. The more I spoke without fear, the more natural it became. I didn't have to try anymore. Words just came, sometimes clumsy, sometimes clear, but always mine. And for the first time. I liked the sound of my own voice in English. I also started noticing how I was thinking in English. At the grocery store, I'd ask myself, "Do we need eggs?" Not, "Est-ce qu'on a besoin des œufs?" which is how my mind worked in French before. I would scroll through online shops and read reviews in English, understanding not just the words but the humor and tone behind them. That was a new kind of victory. Then came the turning point. It was a rainy Wednesday evening, typical for my city, and I almost skipped my usual language exchange meeting, but I'm glad I didn't. That night I met Marcus, a British film student with the thickest London accent I'd ever heard. We got into a deep discussion about movies and somewhere. Between comparing our favorite directors and quoting dialogue, he stopped and asked, "Wait, are you sure English isn't your first language?" At first I thought he was being kind, but then I realized he meant it. I laughed, genuinely. "Nope," I said. "I just finally started speaking without fear." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. I wrote it in my journal. I whispered it on walks. I even pinned it on my wall above my desk. I just finally started speaking without fear, because it was true. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't borrowing lines from textbooks. I was having real conversations about things that mattered to me in a language that was becoming mine. So what really changed? It wasn't grammar books. It wasn't memorizing vocabulary lists or drilling verb tenses until my eyes crossed. It was this, speaking every day, even to myself, even if just 2 sentences, making mistakes proudly, because mistakes were proof I was trying. Surrounding myself with English in fun, low-pressure ways through podcasts, casual chats, cafe meetups, YouTube vlogs, and my inner monologue. It felt like the first time I had found freedom through a language. I stopped copying others. I stopped worrying if I sounded native. Instead, I asked myself, does this sound like me? That was the goal. That was the standard. I didn't want to be flawless. I wanted to be free. I remember one specific day in October when everything just clicked. I was recording a video journal about my travels, something I'd started doing to track my English progress, and I noticed that I wasn't pausing. I wasn't translating. I wasn't second-guessing. I was talking, naturally, honestly, comfortably. That's when I knew I had become someone new, someone who spoke English not just with her mouth, but with her heart. The morning was like any other, except this one had a particular energy to it, a kind of anticipation that I hadn't expected. I had joined a Zoom call with fellow bloggers from around the world, sharing tips, stories, and ideas about the best travel destinations. The call was meant to be casual, a relaxed meetup among like-minded individuals with no real agenda other than to connect. I had joined these calls before, and honestly, I enjoyed them. It was a great way to meet new people and exchange knowledge. But there was always one thing that nagged at the back of my mind: the fear of speaking up. You see, though I had come a long way in improving my spoken English, I still carried that feeling of hesitation when it came to speaking in front of a group. There was always that small voice in my head that told me I wasn't quite fluent enough, that I might make a mistake, that my accent might stand out, or worse, that I might not be understood. But over the past few months, I had made strides in overcoming that fear. Little by little, I had stopped worrying about being perfect and had started embracing the realness of communication. Speaking wasn't just about being grammatically correct or sounding polished. It was about expressing yourself, connecting with others, and enjoying the process. But still, the fear lingered in the background. As I settled into the call that morning, the familiar faces of bloggers from 5 different countries popped up on my screen. There was Luca from Italy, Sophie from France, Marco from Brazil, Ava from Australia, and James from the UK. We had all been in touch for a while, sharing our travel experiences and ideas for new projects. It was always a pleasant and friendly group, and yet I could feel my nerves rising slightly as I waited for the discussion to begin. The host of the call, Lena, who was a professional travel content creator with thousands of followers, started the conversation. She asked each of us to share our recent experiences with travel bloggers and how we were managing our growing audiences. I listened carefully, nodding, as each of my fellow bloggers spoke. I could sense a relaxed rhythm in the conversation, and as I heard their voices, I felt a sense of relief. The pressure seemed to lift. Everyone was just sharing, no one was judging. I found myself becoming more comfortable, more engaged in the conversation. Then, out of nowhere, Lena turned to me and said, "Hailey, why don't you lead the conversation for the next 5 minutes? You always have such interesting ideas about content creation and traveling solo." I froze. Lead the conversation? My heart skipped a beat. I had always been the one to listen, to participate, but never to take charge. This was a first for me, and immediately I felt a rush of panic. The voice in my head shouted, "What if I mess up? What if they think I'm not good enough to lead?" I could feel the pressure building up, but then something surprising happened. Instead of saying, "Oh no, I can't do this," like I would have in the past, I paused. I took a deep breath, and somehow I just smiled. I heard myself saying, "Sure, I'd love to." In that moment, I decided to push past the hesitation and take a chance. I wasn't perfect, and I wasn't going to pretend to be, but I was going to speak confidently, not because I had all the answers, but because I trusted that I had something valuable to share. I started speaking. The first few words felt a little stiff, but as I continued, I relaxed. I spoke about how traveling had opened my mind to different cultures, how it had taught me the importance of being open to new experiences. I talked about some of the challenges I faced while traveling solo, and how blogging had helped me connect with people in ways I never imagined. What struck me the most was that my words flowed effortlessly, and the sentences I constructed were clear and natural. I wasn't constantly searching for the right words or trying to think of the perfect sentence structure. It felt like I was simply talking, like I was having a conversation with a close friend, not with a group of professionals. From around the world, my accent didn't matter, my grammar didn't matter. What mattered was that I was communicating. I was being myself, and my audience was responding with interest and enthusiasm. They were nodding, smiling, and engaging with the conversation, asking me questions and adding their own thoughts. I remember looking at the faces on my screen and seeing genuine interest, not just in the content I was sharing, but in me as a person. It was the first time in a long time that I realized I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to worry about every mistake. I was connecting with people, and that was all that mattered. When I finished, there was a brief moment of silence. Then Lena spoke up, saying, "Hailey, that was amazing. You really brought something special to this conversation. Your English was so natural and confident. Well done." And in that moment, I didn't just feel proud of what I had said, but I felt proud of who I had become. I had stopped worrying about making mistakes and had embraced the freedom of speaking naturally. I had always heard that confidence comes with practice, but now I truly understood what that meant. Speaking wasn't about being flawless, it was about being real and letting your voice be heard. After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. I didn't just learn English, I thought. I owned it. For the first time, I didn't just speak English. I was living it. I wasn't just waiting for the perfect moment to speak. I was creating that moment myself. It was a turning point for me, one that proved that language is about more than just words and grammar. It's about connection. It's about sharing your story, your thoughts, and your ideas with the world in the most authentic way possible. And that was the day I realized I was free. Free from the fears that had once held me back, free to speak, to express myself, and to be confident in my own voice. Have you ever felt afraid to speak English? Let me tell you something. You don't need to be perfect to start speaking. You just need to start. So here's what we do. Speak English every day. Listen. Practice. Laugh at your mistakes. Let's grow together. Like this video, if Hailey's story inspired you, comment your own English journey below, and don't forget to subscribe to English Tone for more real stories and powerful tips. Let's speak English confidently, starting today.